Hi everyone, welcome to Cannabis is Medicine UK. Hope you're all doing well. I thought I'd do a bit of an update on the discrimination complaint that I made to my local hospital. But basically, in a nutshell, I was injured and went to A&E and was in a lot of pain. And I needed some pain relief, and I asked the nurse who was looking after me if I could either be wheeled out because I was hooked up to a drip, or if I could be provided with a room to vape my medicine. And she didn't believe it was legal, and she also said it was a gateway drug that leads to heroin, and that she refused to let me vape anywhere, even outside, because she said it wasn't fair on patients who have, potential addiction issues of which it could lead to heroin. So I made a formal complaint, and it took a few months to get a response back, but I did get a response quite recently. And it's not a great response at all. For a start, it completely ignores the stigma that I experienced by being told that it's a gateway drug that leads to heroin. And they've completely ignored that. But also, I just feel like it's the classic sort of formal complaint response where they just fob you off and say they're looking into it, and they never do. So after that, I got in touch with Sal, who works at Sanskara platform, which is an organisation that fights for patients' rights and spreads awareness. And then he escalated this to a board of directors, and it was read out, and I've got the recording here, so I'll play it to you now.
What has the Trust done or plans to do to fulfil our general and specific public sector duties, in particular in relation to, and then there are 5 elements, so this is why we need to have it in advance, demonstrating that you eliminate unlawful discrimination, harassment or victimisation and other conduct prohibited by the Equalities Act against disabled people, in particular those with medical cannabis dependencies. Advancing equality and opportunity between people who share protected characteristics, in particular disabled people, and in particular, again, those with medical cannabis patients. Fostering good relations between people who share protected characteristics, in particular disabled people, and again, in particular, medical cannabis patients. What are the policies and expectations around the self-medication of controlled medication by patients at University Hospital Sussex? And finally, please can you confirm if there is any restriction on the use of nebulizers on Trust premises, including, it's a very specific reference to a GMDN 12716 heated nebulizer, more commonly known as a dry herb vaporizer. And if there are any restrictions, can you please share why there are these restrictions?
Thank you very much. I'm giving a written response because not everybody is kind of totally up to speed with medicines management guidance and technology appraisals. So medicinal cannabis is a Schedule 4 drug. It's a controlled drug substance, and so it is covered very stringently by those regulations. We are compliant with those regulations, and we use medicinal cannabis and all those aspects like cannabinoids and sativex in accordance with the strict guidance that is out there for nationally prescribed. I've given you some. For example, nabilone we use relatively frequently in nausea and vomiting, persistent nausea and vomiting post-chemotherapy and other situations. We use sativex is prescribable by a very specific number of doctors. For example, in neurorehabilitation with respect to trial for MS patients. So for assurance on some of those questions which implied or asked the question around were we enabling medicinal cannabis to be prescribed and used? Yes, and we have that in the trust. If they came in on that, then because it's covered by our medicines management and our technology appraisals, it is available to them in the trust. We have to have very specific regulated people to start it. So it is not a question of just any doctor starting this. The dried herb nebulizers are otherwise known as vaping, and vaping is covered under our smoking policy. So there is a smoking policy or a smoke-free area. There is no smoking and no vaping in any trust circumstances. And the only thing that this is relevant to would be legal nebulizable cannabis. And the only thing that could be possible to be used in the trust is prescription medicinal cannabis would be on site. There isn't, as yet, a prescribable, vapable medicinal cannabis. If there was, then you would have to have it in one of our properly ventilated rooms, just like you would do our other drugs. If people want to vape viable cannabinoid substances, then it's covered by the smoking policy, and that would have to be outside our trust premises. So in other words, you can't smoke and you can't vape anything on our wards or internal to the trust. But if you stand outside in one of our designated areas or you're walking down the street, then yes.
We are absolutely under a duty to promote equality of opportunity and eliminate unlawful discrimination under the public sector equality duty. We have a policy that sets out our processes and for doing that, which includes undertaking things like due regard assessments of our other policies to make sure, and then we monitor data to make sure that we're not having or assume we're not having an adverse impact on people with protected characteristics. And we want to be familiar with 9 protected characteristics, of which disability is one. And we publish annually an equality and diversity report, which goes through, tries to analyse our data. Again, it's under the public sector equality duty. Analyse our data to look at where we can identify difference and then take steps to reduce that. And a different example, but the gender pay gap is one of those reports in the form we're seeing, and then we take steps and actions to try and reduce that. I believe we are trying to produce a disability pay gap, add that to our elements of reporting in the future. And similarly, ethnicity pay gap as well in the future. So we do monitor data, we publish that data and try to do that to sort of try and identify where it may have issues. Just in relation to disability, we also specifically have obligations to make reasonable adjustment for patients and disabled people in our employment to make sure that they're able to participate in the workplace. And we also offer a guaranteed interview scheme for people who, and we're a 2 ticks disability confident employers, the sort of accreditation that goes with that scheme.
So that is that. And then I'm just going to play you a clip from our MCPA industry meeting that we had last week. And we had Guy Coxall on, who's a lawyer. He runs Seed Our Future. And this is what he said about medical cannabis in hospitals.
Yes, I mean, I have come across some cases where patients have been refused to use their medication inside the hospital, and I've had cases where people have been through surgery and, they're carrying, liquids and having to walk for 10 minutes downstairs, down through lifts, to an outside smoking area to use their medication, and that's absolutely disgraceful. It's unreasonable and it's unethical. Yeah. I mean, the thing is that it sounds to me that hospitals aren't, even though it's a special medicine, it's still it's still a legal prescribed medication from a specialist consultant. So I just don't understand why they're treating it differently, other than that it's stigma and discrimination, and they're not used to the vaporization aspect, I suppose, of medicines. It's never happened before, and they're often worried about, it setting off fire alarms or affecting patients in the vicinity or anything like that. But actually, there's all the evidence to show the opposite of that. So it's perfectly safe. There's actually a document I have. If anybody wants it, they can. I should put it on the website, really. But it was a clinical trial in a 3 by 2 meter room with 2 medical staff, and they were administering vaporized cannabis to a patient for like 2.5 hours, and then they did a blood test on the staff afterwards, and there were no detectable cannabinoids whatsoever.
So yeah, that's my complaint being successfully dealt with, allegedly. It's just really shocking as to how much stigma is kicking around in the NHS. the female director just seemed so convinced that there is no legal vapable medical cannabis. I mean, it just seems so crazy when flower is the original medical cannabis. It's not been altered in any way. It just shows how much cannabis flower and vaping cannabis flower is just not seen as a medicine. And also, it just comes across that they still don't really know the law, because all she's focusing on is the drugs that the NHS can prescribe for chemo-related nausea and for MS. And she's not aware that medical cannabis exists via private prescription, and this is after a formal complaint explaining all of that, they still don't get it. So I'm just very disappointed, because you would have thought that they would check out the legality of it all, but they're still saying that vaping cannabis comes under the laws for vaping in hospitals, which is basically nicotine, and it doesn't. It's not. It's a medicine. It's not nicotine. So it's not under the smoking vaping ban. And she did say that if there was a vapable medical cannabis that exists, then they would have to provide a room legally for a cannabis patient to vaporize their medicine. So basically, they have broken the law with me, and they are going to continue to break the law with other medical cannabis patients in Brighton who go to our local hospital. And for me, I think this is one of the most important areas to challenge and to educate people with, because we're all patients here, and we're either going to have some sort of chronic physical illness, or we're going to have a chronic mental health illness, and at some point most of us are going to need a hospital, whether it's via A&E or whether it's via inpatient. And it really, really scares me as a patient who can't take opiates, who needs to use my medical cannabis, because opiates are really dangerous for me. So it's an area that I'm going to continue to shed light into, and it's very disappointing. And I think what I'm going to do is get my solicitor from my I360 case onto this, because I don't feel like I'm getting anywhere with this complaint. Like, I've had the formal complaint response, and I've had it aired at the public hearing, and then just not getting it. So I think the next thing to do is to bring a case, if my solicitor thinks there is a case, because I do think that this would set precedent. As far as I know, there hasn't been anyone that has successfully sued the NHS for disability discrimination with medical cannabis. And I do feel like it would hopefully set a bit of a precedent for other trusts to educate their staff and to allow medical cannabis to be vaped in a room provided by them. It's not as simple as going outside. As I experienced when I was hooked up to a drip, and at the time my friend wasn't with me, so I didn't have anyone that could help me. I needed a nurse to push me in a wheelchair outside or provide a room for me, and neither of those were options that the nurse was willing to undertake. And as Guy Coxall said in his soundbite there, patients that are inpatients are sort of having to walk 10-15 minutes with a drip, whilst being very ill, in order to go and vape outside, and that's not acceptable. So yeah, that's where I'm at with this case. I think it's a very important topic, and wondering if any of you guys have had any experience, whether you've been inpatient in a hospital or whether you've been at A&E. I know when I did my last video, a lot of you said you just went outside and had a quick vape. But for those of you who couldn't just nip outside, if you were hooked up to equipment or monitors or anything, what did you do then? And I know that we have oil, but it's not something that's very portable. I don't carry my oil around with me, so it's not something that I have on me when I go out. out. Whereas, and the other thing is that vaping flower is such an instant pain relief that when you're really injured or poorly, you want that instant effect. You don't want to wait for an hour for it to kick in. So that's why I was so desperate to vape flower, was because A, I didn't have my oil on me, and B, I knew it would be an instant pain relieving effect, and I was trying to avoid taking dangerous opiates for myself. I hope that's helpful for some of you. Anyway, take care everyone. Have a good day. Bye.